Have you counted your ums lately? Or someone else's ums, ahs, like, right? Those verbal crutches, verbal viruses that are credibility killers. They really are. Not so bad in everyday casual conversation, but if you're in a position where you need to do some public speaking or go on a job interview, or you're entering an important social situation where you'd like to sound articulate and intelligent, those verbal crutches have got to go. I'm a professional. I usually do pretty well with a script. Recently, I heard a recorded element of myself that was a more ad-libbed and conversational environment, and I was so surprised. I was using constantly. It was in every other sentence, in some cases, every few words. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked and a little embarrassed. I hear my kids do it all the time, and other kids and other adults. Most adults I know tend to use where kids use like, or compound like, or whatever. And they're inserting these little useless words into what should be pauses. So we're going to look at a few different exercises that can help you not eliminate the verbal crutches, because they are a natural part of conversation. It's okay to have a few here and there, but you do want to avoid letting them seep in to every pause in your conversation, which happens to a lot of people. It's very habit forming, and most of us aren't even aware of it until we hear ourselves back. I wasn't aware. I knew I had some verbal crutches, but I wasn't aware of which words I even used. And it's virtually impossible to count your own ums and ahs and knows in regular conversation. You can count other people's. That's kind of fun. But what you're going to need to do, the first exercise, is to actually ask someone to help you out with it. A trusted friend or a family member, and go ahead and give them permission to draw your attention to it every time you're falling back and using too many verbal crutches, and ask them to help you identify which word you're using, because that will actually help you. You'll find out in the next exercise, which is, like it or not, recording yourself. It's just the only way to get a true sense of how you sound and how you're coming across to others. Using these verbal crutches, it can undermine your authority. It can make you sound like, it can make you sound insecure and less sure of what you're saying, even when you might know a lot about the subject. So they've really got to go. So exercise 2 is record yourself. Find a device. You can use your webcam. You can use voicemail or an app on your phone. There's a lot of good little programs out there that you can record yourself and listen back. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. They don't like the sound of their own voice. They don't like listening to themselves back on a recording. But you've got to get over that, because the more comfortable you get with how you sound and how you talk, the better you'll come across in an interview or in public speaking. Now, before you hit record, come up with a subject matter to talk to yourself about for a while, because if you're anything like me, you'll just kind of dummy up and think, oh, what am I going to talk about? A few good topics are job description. A job description, you can describe your neighborhood, maybe describe some of your friends and family members, something that will encourage you to actually ramble on a bit. This is one of the few times you do want to ramble on, because, trust me, at first, when you hit record, you're not going to be using those crutch words quite as much as you normally would, because you're already aware of it and you're listening for them. You are likely to find some big, uncomfortable, awkward pauses and gaps as you try to avoid using those words. But the more you talk and the more detail you get into, eventually those little crutch words will sneak their way in, and they'll rear their ugly head, and you'll be able to determine which words you use. Now, when you're listening back, it can be painful. It was for me, because, like I said, those awkward pauses and gaps, I mean, you could drive a truck through them. It sounded awful. But the more you practice and the more you do this, Trust me, the shorter those gaps and pauses will get, they'll start to sound a little more natural. And ultimately, when you get really good at this, which I'm still working on, they'll actually enhance your speaking and your conversations by adding a little drama and suspense with those seemingly awkward pauses. Another thing that's important to remember is always have an out. Obviously, if you're public speaking, but if you're headed into a job interview or an important social situation, have a phrase you're comfortable with, a fallback phrase that you know lends itself to exiting the conversation or wrapping up the talk. Because that's when people tend to let those crutch words or just useless verbiage seep into their conversation when they're transitioning or when they're trying to wrap things up, and they tend to ramble on a bit, like I'm very prone to doing. So with that, I will wrap it up with today's words of wisdom. I'm Rondepierre.